Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grayson. This is the KMG show for Tuesday, February the 15th, 2022. Our theme tonight, all hail Marshal Trudeau and his glorious new regime. All wreckers, saboteurs, and right deviationists to the wall. Yes, that was pretty much the message that we got from Canada's media today. I mean, there's some holdouts. There's post-millennial and Rebel News and LifeSite, but the rest of them, they're either, of the government, like the CBC, or they are funded by the government. That would be, everybody else. Martial law? What are you talking about? There's no martial law. Well, yeah, but I've looked at the Emergency Act. That's not martial law, okay? You know why it isn't martial law? Because we say it's not martial law. Justin Trudeau, or Marshal Trudeau, as I shall call him, along with the Princess Rockstar. This appeared on Breitbart today. A lot of people are talking about it. I remembered it from the time. This is by Brecken Thies. Trudeau, who is under fire for his poor handling of his country's anti-mandate protests, praised Canada's dictatorship in a resurfaced video from 2013. At a Women's Night town hall in November of that year, then Liberal Party leader Trudeau was asked, quote, "Which nation, besides Canada, which nation's administration do you most admire and why?" unquote. Trudeau responded, quote, "There's a level of admiration I actually have for China, because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and saying, we need to go greenest fastest. We need to start, investing in solar. There is a flexibility that I know that Stephen Harper must dream about, of having a dictatorship that he can do everything he wanted, that I find quite interesting," unquote. Yes. How stupid is Justin Trudeau? He actually believes that China wants to go greenest fastest. No, China is building a lot of coal burning plants. Yes. And China's reaction to Paris Agreement and the like is pound sand. Okay? You're not going to tell us what to do. And of course, none of these agreements mean anything unless China and India get on board, and they are not going to get on board. So yes, China admitted that. Trudeau admitted the truth long ago. Just some background here. This is from Liberty One News. Erica Carlin. I thought Biden was the worst leader in history, but it seems like Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wants a shot at that title. That blackface-wearing psychopath just declared that the Freedom Convoy protesters were a bunch of swastika-waving racists. According to Trudeau, Canadians have had to deal with swastika and Confederate flags on street corners. In a recently released video, Trudeau tried to convince Canadians that is what is going on at the freedom protests. Quote, "Individuals are trying to blockade our economy, our democracy, and our fellow citizens' daily lives. It has to stop. The people of Ottawa don't deserve to be harassed in their own neighborhoods. They don't deserve to be confronted with the inherent violence of a swastika flying on a street corner or a Confederate flag or the insults and jeers just because they're wearing a mask. That's not who Canadians are. That's not what Canadians demonstrated over the past 2 years of consistently, continually being there for each other. The people of Ottawa, indeed, people across the country, deserve to have their safety respected and deserve to get their lives back," unquote. Yes. So that's what Canada's been doing for the last 2 years, is letting Canadians be Canadians. No, you can't leave the country. You can't come in the country. No, you have to quarantine, and we're constantly switching the rules about that. Truckers all have to be vaccinated with a mRNA treatment that, as Justin Trudeau can himself testify, does nothing to stop the spread of the Omicron variant. But, get the 2 jabs, then get a third, because This pandemic has sucked for all Canadians, the Prime Minister said. Such an eloquent man. Everyone's tired of COVID, but these protests are not the way to get through it. No, not everyone is tired of COVID. Justin Trudeau is not tired of it at all. Canada, the Emergencies Act was declared yesterday, which is a piece of legislation which was passed under Brian Mulroney, who was previously and perhaps still Canada's worst prime minister, to replace the War Measures Act, which was famously invoked by Pierre Trudeau in October 1970. So essentially, under the Emergencies Act, the government can do whatever it wants to anybody for any reason at all or none. Subject, of course, to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So the government wants to smack down somebody or some organization, are they going to go running to the Supreme Court and get a snap judgment on every single thing? No, I don't think so. By the time any of these things are adjudicated, if they're ever adjudicated, the damage will have been done. Chrystia Freeland is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, formerly Foreign Minister, and she has a very passionate connection to the Ukraine and to her Nazi collaborator grandfather, but I'll have more on that shortly. She was up front and center, delivering the bad news to Canadians and the good news to lovers of tyranny. Yesterday, against the world, liberal democracies have been facing serious and sustained threats. We may have hoped that Canada would be spared. Over the past 2.5 weeks, we have learned that it is not. I'm not going to attempt to imitate Chrystia Freeland's ridiculous little girl sing-song delivery and that thing with the head that she does whenever she is speaking. But back to the text. This occupation of the blockades are causing serious harm to our economy, to our democratic institutions, and to Canada's international standing. The world's confidence in Canada as a place to invest and do business is being undermined. These illegal blockades are doing great damage to Canada's economy and to our reputation as a reliable trading partner. And then she gives some figures about hundreds of millions of dollars lost. We fought tooth and nail to protect Canada's privileged trading relationship during the United States during the NAFTA negotiations and in the face of the illegal and unjustified 232 tariffs. Chrystia Freeland insisted in the negotiations, or in the lead up to the negotiations over NAFTA, second time round, that all of Canada's demands were going to be through a feminist lens. Yes, that's so trivial she is. We cannot allow that hard-won success to be compromised. The world is watching. Yes, indeed, the world is watching. Our jobs, our prosperity, and our livelihoods are at stake. Now the federal government is interested in the livelihoods of Canadians. That is why our government is taking action. We are resolute and determined. These illegal blockades must and will end. As part of the evoking the Emergencies Act, we are announcing the following immediate actions. First, we are broadening the scope of Canada's anti-money laundering and terrorist financing rules so that they cover crowdfunding platforms and the payment service providers they use. These changes cover all forms of transactions, including digital assets such as cryptocurrencies. The illegal blockades have highlighted the fact that crowdfunding platforms and some of the payment service providers they use are not fully captured under the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act. Our banks and financial institutions are already obligated to report to the Financial Transactions and Report Analysis Centre of Canada, or FINTRAC. As of today, all crowdfunding platforms and the payment service providers they use must register with FINTRAC and must report large and suspicious transactions to FINTRAC. This will help mitigate the risk that these platforms receive illicit funds, increase the quality and quantity of intelligence received by FINTRAC, and make more information available to support investigations by law enforcement into these illegal blockades. We are making these changes because we know that these platforms are being used to support illegal blockades and illegal activity, which is damaging the Canadian economy. The government will also bring forward legislation to provide these authorities to FINTRAC on a permanent basis. Second, the government is issuing an order with immediate effect under the Emergencies Act authorizing Canadian financial institutions to temporarily cease providing financial services where the institution suspects that account is being used to further the illegal blockades and occupations. This order covers both personal and corporate accounts. Third, we are directing Canadian financial institutions to review their relationships with anyone involved in the illegal blockades and report to the RCMP or CSIS. As of today, a bank or other financial service provider will be able to immediately freeze or suspend the account of an individual or business affiliated with these illegal blockades without a court order. In doing so, they will be protected against civil liability. This is about following the money. In other words, any dissident organization the Canadian government doesn't like is guilty of money laundering. How? How are they guilty of money laundering? They're also supporting terrorists, and anyone who sends money to, say, the truckers is enabling terrorism and has no rights with regard to their money. The banks can simply seize it, and it's tough dookie. It's that simple. No. So the Canadian government is in no way crushing civil liberties. No, 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 no. What gave you that idea? And let's see. What does Zero Hedge have to say about that? More about Zero Hedge later. This is from Mark Jeftovic via bombthrower.com. Martial law in Canada. It's never been riskier to not own Bitcoin. Welcome to the era of civil asset forfeiture for your bank accounts where governments are woke, broke, and the new F word is freedom. Yes, we've been informed by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation that freedom is just another word for neo-Nazism and terrorism. The reporter who wrote the story interviewed three people, and they were all experts on terrorism and right-wing extremism and the like. There was no contrasting voice in the story, none, because that's not how they do things at the CBC anymore. Chrystia Freeland's edict tonight that the government can now seize bank accounts with no due process and no recourse could only have been made possible by a complicit media shaping an utterly false narrative about the truckers' convoy and even of freedom itself. For about 6 years or so, the far left woke progressives have been operating under the assumption of being ironically on the right side of history, that their pronunciations, accusations, and neuroses were canonical truth, while all other thought was heretical and offensive. They believed themselves to be objectively correct about everything, and they evangelized an all-encompassing worldview of purported fairness and equity. Yet the vast majority of their rhetoric is the embodiment of flat-out hatred and othering. For self-declared anti-fascists, their prescriptions around nearly everything amount to pure, unvarnished totalitarianism. They've destroyed classical liberalism, they've hijacked everything to the left of Ronald Reagan, and they've polarized the discourse to such a degree that anything which is not full-throated cultural Marxism is deemed far right. And our author, Jeftovic, links to the now infamous CBC News story, why the word freedom is such a useful rallying cry for protesters. For many, freedom is a malleable term, one that's open to interpretation. That flexibility in part has fueled its growth amongst wreckers and saboteurs, kulaks. Oh, according to the Globe and Mail, the alt-right, which stopped existing after Charlottesville, has weaponized freedom to undermine democracy. Yes, I've been thinking about this because I have a bank account. Could I be seen to be a supporter of the truckers? Yes, obviously, I'm a supporter. Have I sent them money? No, I have not. Could my support for the truckers on Twitter and on this live stream be seen as an inducement for people to donate money to the truckers? I suppose it could, which means I could have my bank account seized by Chrystia Freeland's goons. And our author writes, make no mistake, this is Cyprus 2.0. Remember how after the Cyprus bail-in of 2013, legislation that permitted the same thing was rapidly adopted by governments all over the world? Yesterday's move by Freeland and the Liberals just ushered in the era of civil asset forfeiture for your bank accounts. All we need is for someone to bless it with the word template. Now, this is supposed to be approved within a week by the House of Commons and the Senate. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. Oh, there's someone on Twitter with 15,000.4K followers called, I don't know how to pronounce it, Alila or something like that, Picasso or Picasso. And I'm looking at her grim visage here, and she seriously looks like an NKVD interrogator. And she was quite upset by a response that I had made to her. And so she called me a white supremacist and an anti-Semite, because of course, anyone who disagrees with Alila Picasso is obviously a white supremacist, whatever that might mean, and an anti-Semite, again, whatever that might mean. It'd be interesting to go through what Alila Picasso has written about, say, I don't know, Israel and Palestine. I think that would be quite interesting, but I'll get around to that eventually. And let's go to the chat. Hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth, Anrun, David the Gnome, Martin Matushak, Dan Allison, Palpicasso 88, David the Gnome, Chogan 666, geez, Histal, Vistula Viper. Sorry you are living behind enemy lines, he says. Benjamin K says Trudeau unsuited for public office in a democracy. Hello to Dr. Dead Name. Dawn from Beyond, John S. Gamion. Frothing Fanboy says all orders, measures, and mandates could be 100% removed, but a line has been crossed. It's like 9/11. Nothing can ever be remotely the same. Things are getting worse, and we had better face the fact. Denny McDougall says Justin's father was always thought of a strong leader during the FLQ crisis, but didn't he actually let the kidnappers and murderers go to Cuba? I'll be talking about the War Measures Act shortly. David the Gnome says, you don't like the new terms and services for being a Canadian? Your bank account is gone. And Dr. Dead Name says the government is lawless. The law is just something to use against political enemies. They don't bother to conceal it anymore. Yes, well, we have this risibly named Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which replaced our old common law system with positivist laws. And guess who decides what the laws are? Unelected judges. Oh, did you know that prostitution is legal in Canada? Did you know that physician-assisted murder is legal in Canada? Do you know that it's illegal for school boards to make decisions on curricula when the school board's members can be said to hold religious opinions? Yes, these are all decisions made by the Supreme Court of Canada. Also, a decision going back quite a long time that truth is not a defense to the accusation of hate speech. Yes, some of the wonderful rights and liberties that we enjoy in Canada. Hello to David Wright. I am not going to repeat the famous Thomas Jefferson quote. I think you know why. Hello to Argon the Sad and Zen Master Football Analysis, Visionary Companion. Justin Proto, can KMG claim refugee status and come to the USA now? Well, I've had opportunities in the past to live permanently in the United States, get my green card. And I just decided that no, I want to stay here with my people. What's the parallels between this and the October crisis? Someone named Trudeau, utter panic. 2 people were kidnapped in 1970. 2 people in the whole of Canada. The whole of Canada was put under martial law. About 500 people were arrested, held without habeas corpus, including journalists, including Nick Aftermar, whose daughter later became the bass player for the band called Hole. Frothing Fanboy says, I don't know if Paul Rose went to Cuba, but he was never thrown into the NDP as far as I know. Maybe I'm incorrect. Okay. The October crisis led to, well, the triumph of this, in pretty short order, to the triumph of the sovereigntists in Quebec. And they've ruled it off and on ever since. Oh, of course, there's also the RCMP deciding to burn down barns in an attempt to frame people. At the time, there was no more than 40 or 50 members of the Quebec Liberation Front, the FLQ. And Pierre Trudeau just flew into a rage and panicked. Now, this is from Roberto Wakewell Cruz at Post Millennial. Give, Send, Go back up and running after cyber attack. Yes, the cyber attack included a hack that revealed the names of thousands of donors to the Canadian Truckers' Freedom Convoy, as well as the dollar amounts that each person donated. This stuff was put on Twitter, even though that's supposedly against Twitter's policies. And who happened to hack? This company. The Canadian government, CSIS, the US government, CIA, or any of the alphabet agencies? As described by the National Post on Sunday night, this site's homepage was replaced with Give, Send, Go is now frozen in bold blue text, as well as a manifesto scrolling over a clip from the Disney film Frozen 2 depicting Elsa singing Show Yourself while riding across the dark sea on a horse made of water. Give, Send, Go provided an update to their statement stating, we know there are many questions concerning the attacks on Give, Send, Go Sunday night. Sunday evening, February the 13th, Give, Send, Go was attacked by malicious actors attempting to eliminate the ability of its users to raise funds. There was a broadcasted breach showing one such actor illegally hacking into Give, Send, Go and distributing the names and emails of the donors of the Freedom Convoy campaign. However, no credit card information was leaked. No money was stolen. We are in a battle. We didn't expect it to be easy. This has not caused us to be afraid. Instead, it's made it even more evident that we cannot back down. Thank you for your continued support, prayers, and the countless emails letting us know you are standing with us. Well, okay. So the original GoFundMe was shut down by GoFundMe because the word was sent to them, you had better not get involved with this. Initially, they were going to seize the money, over $10 million, and only refund when direct requests were made, and then they were shamed into making automatic rebates. Everything that we use on the internet is subject to takeover by government or by so-called malicious actors acting at the behest of government. Every single thing. What's happening in Ottawa? It's my understanding that there's still a lot of truckers and their supporters there. Someone called Bethany Tunn tweeted, if insurances are suspended and trucks towed and Trudeau doesn't let you on a plane or train and bank accounts frozen, may as well call these truckers citizens of Ottawa now. Everyone is so ridiculous. Trudeau has yet to prove why the federal mandates are needed at this point. I'm going to talk about Andrew Coyne, and guess what? I know this is going to be a big surprise for people. Andrew Coyne has decided, yes to tyranny, yes to smashing the saboteurs, wreckers, and right deviationists. He published just about an hour ago on the Globe and Mail why Ottawa was justified in invoking the Emergencies Act. Yes, of course, Andrew Coyne is arguably Canada's most famous classical liberal. But I believe in John Stuart Mill, there's a passage where the 4 Bs justify government crackdown. And what were those 4? But let's see if I can remember the 4 Bs. They would be beards, beer, burgers, and bouncy castles. Yep. So yes, fully justified. Oh, let's see. The Trudeau government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act in relief of the siege of Ottawa and associated blockades at various border points is, according to Toronto Star, a shocking admission of failure. It is certainly that. That doesn't make it wrong. It should never have come to this, but it has. The police should have prevented the blockades from taking root, but they didn't. There will be time enough to debate why the stable door wasn't barred, but for now, the job is to get the horse back in the barn. The question is whether the Emergencies Act is the right way to do it. Let's be clear first about what the Act does not do. It does not empower the government to call in the military. No, really? Or to suspend charter rights. Who gets to decide what the charter rights are? The declaration of emergency, giving effect to its powers, must be confirmed by a vote of Parliament and applies only for 30 days. Whatever measures the government takes under the Act are subject to oversight by a parliamentary committee, which will be controlled by the Liberals and the NDP, and reviewed by the courts. The onus will be on the government throughout to justify its use of the Act. The first hurdle will be to show the declaration of a public order emergency, whether it meets the test contained within the Act itself. Quote, threats to the security of Canada that are so serious as to be a national emergency, further defined as an urgent and critical situation that seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians to an extent that exceeds the capacity or authority of the provinces or seriously threatens the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada, and which cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. Yeah, clearly Canada is not in that state. Not even close. Ooh, but how about the unwillingness of towing companies to remove the offending trucks for fear of what this would mean for their business? Yeah, I can say that's a huge, huge problem. One good thing about this is that I don't want to ever hear, and I don't know that we're ever going to hear, Andrew Coyne rabbit on about liberty or freedom or reasonableness ever again. He is busted, and not before time. Oh, the police chief of Ottawa has resigned. Peter Stoley is his name. He's a black man from Jamaica. And since he showed up as the chief of Ottawa Police Service, racist, my police service is oh so very racist. Guess what? He was not particularly liked by his policemen. It has been a difficult journey. Okay. Since the onset of this demonstration, I've done everything possible to keep the city safe and to put an end to this unprecedented and unforeseen crisis. One wonders, he jumped before he was pushed. And what else do we have here? Oh, the Globe and Mail. Its editorial board, why Ottawa's justified invoking the Emergency Act. Well, yes, of course. The New York Times, shockingly, referred to yesterday in a since deleted tweet, martial law in Canada. Oh, and Rosemary Barton of the CBC and others howled in outrage. It is not martial law. And how do we know that? Because we're telling you, okay? And we don't want to have to tell you twice. I'm reminded of a piece, this was brought to my attention, a piece from May 8th last year about the New York Times, which backtracked. No, it's not martial law, perfectly justified. Why is everyone getting upset? Piece by Mary Kay Ling at the New York Post. Essentially, the New York Times has lied and lied and lied again. The New York Times infamously lied about Stalin and the Holodomor in the Ukraine. The New York Times lied about Hitler. The New York Times lied about, based on obvious falsehoods about WMDs in Iraq. They lied to justify the illegal invasion of Iraq. More recently, they've lied about the Steele dossier. They've lied about Russiagate. They've lied about the death of Brian Sicknick, and they have lied about the phantom bounties that Russia was supposedly paying for the death of American soldiers in Afghanistan. And of course, I'm reminded of the famous statement made by the Austrian auteur Karl Kraus. How is the world ruled and led to war? Diplomats lie to journalists and believe these lies when they see them in print, which is exactly how the FISA warrants against Trump, to spy on Trump, were issued. This is exactly how the nonsense of Russiagate was justified by diplomats or so-called members of the intelligence community lying to journalists, the journalists printing them, and the so-called intelligence community. See, it's true. It has to be true because it was in the New York Times or the Washington Post. And, let's see. Let's check CBC News and see whether there are any breaking stories. Doug Ford's ex-chief of staff leads back-channel talks between City of Ottawa and the protesters. Armed with new powers, police are working day and night to end Ottawa occupation, minister says. Blockade at Manitoba U.S. border expected ends Wednesday, RCMP says. The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act. Here's what that means. Yeah, here's what the CBC wants you to believe that it means. In my own province of British Columbia, no, we're going to be perhaps the last jurisdiction in North America to go back to normal. According to Courtney Dixon of the CBC, BC will lift most COVID-19 restrictions Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. BC health officials announced Tuesday indoor personal gatherings, indoor and outdoor organized gatherings, and indoor seated events will be able to return to full capacity as long as attendees wear masks and BC vaccine cards are used. No, the masks and the vaccine mandate are the two most oppressive parts of the sanitary dictatorship, and they're going to be kept. Well, we know because Dr. Bonnie Henry has said, and Dr. Bonnie Henry is the de facto dictator of British Columbia, that they will remain in force until June the 30th. Of course, despite the fact that the mRNA technology, even triple jabbed with it, has no efficacy against people becoming infected with the Omicron variant. But that doesn't matter. Okay, and we did that. Oh, yes. John Iveson in the National Post. On the one hand, this, on the one hand, that. More in sorrow than in anger. Keep in mind that Post Media has received millions of dollars from Trudeau's government. And as they say, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Yes, Trudeau's intolerance of unacceptable views clearly extends to members of the official opposition, but he would do well to open himself to the possibility that he's not infallible. I thought, Iveson is being reasonable here for a change. But wait, have to call out an expert because, darkness, there's darkness. The vilification of 3 million unvaccinated Canadians and their virtual exclusion from mainstream society has allowed demagogues to claim that Canada is divided into antagonistic camps. Demagogues, I guess that's what they call people in Canada who speak the truth. Conspiracies turn everything mundane into something cosmic. Minor policy disagreements are elevated to battles of good versus evil with the elite against the people, said Amarnath Amarasingam, a Canadian extremism researcher and academic. This fellow is a foreigner who hates Canada. Canada's white supremacist, white nationalist, neo-Nazi. He says that practically every day. So he would be the go-to fellow for John Iveson. Where the money is coming from to fund this fellow's investigations into extremism, curious question. Well, it's the government of Canada, but you can rest assured that any investigation into extremism funded by the government Canada is in no way poisoned by that. No, 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 no. Leave aside the Heritage Front. Leave aside the fact that the most significant neo-Nazi organization in Canadian history was funded and directed by the Canadian government. How about that, eh? I've mentioned many times on this live stream that Canada is increasingly run by a cabal of PR spivs. And many of these people, they go into politics, they come out of politics, back into PR, and vice versa. It just never ends. One of Canada's best known political hack PR spivs is a fellow called Tim Powers, who I believe runs his own shop. Yes, he's chairman of Summa Strategies and the managing director of Abacus Data. Well, that's really good. So I guess he's got his own public opinion company as well. And he has a petulant piece at Saltwire. I guess he made this available to anyone who wanted it. Conservative Party of Canada is at a crossroads. It's going to take more than a change of leadership to gain ground. And there's a picture of him gurning away. Oh, it's an existential crisis. The Conservative Party of Canada is a crucial moment in its history, formed in late 2003. As it nears its 20th anniversary, its future in its current form is far from certain. Whether you're a conservative partisan or simply a citizen who believes in a healthy political landscape, it is time to be concerned. Canada needs strong leadership from all our main and national political parties as we navigate this obviously turbulent and troubled time in our history. The Conservative Party of Canada has been lost at sea since 2015. It will shipwreck itself unless it addresses the uncomfortable truths around some of its current practices and fails to recognize that simply not being the Trudeau Liberal Party isn't enough to win an election. Well, maybe they should try that, because they haven't in the last two. Oh, yes, and these ugly, ugly people in Ottawa. These people with their beards and their bouncy castle. Howling at the moon and mimicking the tactics of the People's Party of Canada, not winning propositions, never mind that they are an embarrassment to the long, rich history of assorted federal conservative parties in this country. Ones who fought against apartheid. So tiresome. As Mulroney did, or worked to end equality discrimination in the Commonwealth. What? As the Harper government advocated. The Harper government also stood up for the terrorist Tamil Tigers. Oh, no. Stephen Harper is not going to go to a big Beano in Sri Lanka because they were so mean to the Tiger Tamil terrorists. Why would this matter in Canada? Because Canada suicidally decided to take in hundreds of thousands of these people, despite the fact that an Indian province called Tamil Nadu is pretty much a stone's throw for the northernmost part of Sri Lanka. And the Tamils have come to increasingly dominate or become a major figure in politics, both Liberal Party and Conservative Party in Toronto, Greater Toronto. Our PR spiv continues. It has made my stomach churn to see a variety of Conservative members of Parliament participate and celebrate their involvement in the early days of the so-called Freedom Convoy. Okay, once again, so-called plus scare quotes. Or as Canada's most prominent elected Conservative, Ontario's Premier Doug Ford described it as a siege, trying to split hairs over the presence of some legitimate protesters versus supposed individuals acting deplorably is the cheap, weak-kneed politics we are seeing too much of from the opposition benches. Don't take this as an endorsement of the Prime Minister's approach, as that needs work too. Yes, and he takes a shot at Pierre Poilievre, who said, "I am proud of the truckers and stand with them." And our PR spiv comments, Poilievre, an Ottawa area MP, might have been better advised to focus on finding ways to properly work at fixing the real sense of dislocation many Canadians feel. Ooh, dislocation. Stop inflaming it. Do as real leaders do. Address it. Having any admiration for Donald Trump's political strategy and tactics is galling. Overall, Conservatives, you will be doing neither your party nor your country any favors if you take that off ramp. I'm just going to guess that Tim Power's clients are not very happy with the idea of a populist major political party in Canada. So Candice Bergen, no, she's a blonde and about the same age, but not related to the actress. And weirdly, Candice Bergen changed her name not that long ago. So what does Candice Bergen, who is the now the temporary leader of the Conservative Party and official opposition leader, what does she have to say about the declaration of martial law in Canada? Someone asked me about this on Twitter, and I'm scrolling down. Scrolling down. Nothing. That is what the leader of the Conservative Party and leader of the official opposition has to say about the imposition of martial law. Curious, don't you say? Wouldn't you say? I mean, I don't know that I'm surprised. I really don't know. I guess maybe some of their PR spiffs told them, you're seeming kind of extremist here. So the aforementioned Pierre Poilievre, who is the only declared candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party, he has the support of Melissa Lantsman. Also John Baird, which means that the gay mafia that has controlled the Conservative Party for some years is going to remain in the saddle if Poilievre is elected Conservative Party leader. What does he have to say about the declaration of martial law and the seizing of bank accounts? Nothing to say. I guess they haven't had enough focus groups on this. So Poilievre was carrying on about Canada's housing crisis. And here, what's causing Canada's housing crisis? Well, here's a major, if not the major reason. Nicholas Kung writes in the Toronto Star, Canada wants to welcome 1.3 million newcomers over 3 years, but can its immigration system keep up? That's not the actual most important question here. The question is, will this break Canada? And to drive future growth and to help its economy recover from COVID-19. Yes, getting hundreds of thousands of people into Canada who can't speak English or French is going to be wonderful for the economy. Taking in even more tens of thousands of refugees who are 40 to 50% crippled by PTSD because of what they experienced in their country, that's definitely going to be good for the economy. This is the highest level of immigration in history. And what does Pierre Poilievre have to say about Trudeau's demented plan to bring in 1.3 million so-called newcomers? Nothing. I guess because he doesn't want to be seen as a racist, or perhaps because his wife was born in Caracas, Venezuela. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the New Democratic Party, is 100% in favor of martial law in Canada. I wonder why. On November 26, 2016, Jagmeet tweeted he saw a country racked by poverty, illiteracy, and disease, so he led a revolution that uplifted the lives of millions. R.I.P. Fidel Castro. He's literally a commie lover, but the media loves him because he's a Sikh and he has those colorful turbans, and he's always flashing his teeth with his colorful turbans such that he looks like a cartoon villain, and the NDP has suffered greatly in terms of the number of seats it wins during his leadership, but no, everyone loves him. Steve Saylor writes amusingly at uns.com, despite all the assertions that Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has invoked the Emergencies Act to deal with the threat posed by truckers' bouncy houses, is the son of Fidel Castro or Ronnie Wood or whomever, it always seemed more probable to me that he is the son of Pierre Trudeau, who was Prime Minister for around a decade and a half when I was young. A Trudeau père famously imposed the Emergencies Act predecessor the War Powers Act in 1970 in response to French-Canadian terrorists kidnapping a couple of officials, one of whom was later murdered. The government rounded up 497 separatists and raided the homes of 36,000 more. Yep. And he reads the conditions here and concludes, yep, the bouncy house menace is a unique threat. In other Canadian news, the government has resolved to elect a new, less unsatisfactory people. Robert Falconer tweets, Canada has announced record-level immigration targets for 2022 to 2024, equal to 1.3 million people over the 3 years. Yes, electing new people, as Bertolt Brecht famously called it. The leaders of all the Canadian parties, except for Maxime Bernier and his People's Party, believe fervently that foreigners are better than Canadians. Now, one would have thought that this oikophobia would be so shameful that they would keep it to themselves. Nope. They just can't stop saying it out loud. To get a sense of what's going on in Canada over the last 3 weeks, and of course, anyone who's interested in the question is increasingly going to consult foreign sources, because the Canadian media, with some minor exceptions that I mentioned before, is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the government. This is from Sean Collins at Spiked Online. By now, most Americans have heard of the truckers' actions happening north of the border. Based on lurid descriptions of the protests from the U.S. media, they could be forgiven for thinking these protesters are a small bunch of nasty thugs and Nazis who must be put down immediately. Indeed, it seems American reporters and commentators have decided to project all of their hatred of Trumpists and deplorable workers generally onto the Canadian truckers. Just look at how scary and violent these coarse truckers are, we are told. Many outlets reported on how crowdfunding website GoFundMe seized $10 million in donations to the protesters on the grounds that they promote violence and harassment. According to the Washington Post, the truckers' actions are tinged by menace and have surged beyond legitimate protest into the realm of thuggery. NBC News says the demonstration has left many Ottawa residents on edge and afraid to leave their homes. NBC led its story with a quote from 26-year-old Justin Romanov, who emigrated from Russia as a teen. Quote, I do not feel safe in downtown Ottawa right now because I have a feeling if people will learn that I'm a refugee and a gay, I'm afraid of some trouble there, unquote. But NBC could not cite anything negative that actually happened to Romanov. How would anyone be able to tell that he was a refugee and a gay? Oh, won't please someone think about the gay refugees? Of course, the Conservative Party in the past, including Jason Kenney, a former immigration minister, boasted, do you know how many gay refugees from Iran we've brought to Canada? Because that's what Canada needs, gay refugees from Iran. Back to our report. In reality, the thousands who have formed the Freedom Convoy to Canada's capital city have been peaceful. The scene in Ottawa has been described as carnival-like, with people dancing and sharing food. Videos show demonstrators blasting Life is a Highway by the Canadian musician Tom Cochrane from loudspeakers set up on the back of an empty trailer. The footage is not exactly terrifying. Almost every story in the U.S. media about the Canadian truckers comes with a now obligatory reference to swastikas and Confederate flags. NPR's lead stories in recent days have claimed that the protests are rooted in extremism and that its organizers have expressed anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, and conspiratorial worldviews. A CNN reporter said the protests were reminiscent of the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. And just think of the language. I know it sounds familiar to you. A threat to democracy, an insurrection, sedition. Political warns that the truckers' convoy has become a magnet for far-right grievances in the U.S. and globally. In playing up supposed threat of swastikas and Nazis on the rampage in Canada, the U.S. media have allied themselves with Justin Trudeau's propaganda war. Canada's Prime Minister has denigrated the truckers as a few people shouting and waving swastikas. The people of Ottawa, yes, how can they be a few people shouting and waving swastikas and such a threat to Canada that martial law has to be declared? Pick one. The people of Ottawa don't deserve to be confronted with the inherent violence of a swastika flying on a street corner, a Confederate flag. Trudeau said during a debate in the House of Commons Monday night, but as anyone who has watched the videos coming out of Canada can see, truckers and their supporters along the highways and in city streets have been waving red maple leaves, the Canadian national flag. Protesters in Ottawa wear them as capes against the sea of Canadian flags. The New York Times reports at least 2 swastikas have been sighted. Thankfully, there have been some reports on the ground in Canada that are not just repeating Trudeau's slanders. An excellent one comes from Rupa Subramanya, Ottawa-based columnist for the Ottawa National Post. I've spoken to close to 100 protesters, truckers, and other folks, says Subramanya, and not one of them sounded like an insurrectionist, white supremacist, racist, or misogynist. Indeed, from Subramanya's reporting, or simply from watching some video interviews with truckers you can find online, you can tell right away that these are people with legitimate complaints. No, I'm sorry. The government will determine what constitute legitimate complaints. You know, so much of this opposition and hysterical opposition and just outright lies that are being made up, what foments it? Lèse-majesté, as they say. How dare these nobodies protest their oppression? It is really as simple as that. Hello to Tom Anderson. Thank you for your good wishes. Hello to Oscar Tote, Seraphim Goose. Hello to Marissa Mercer. Jagmeet Singh is the embodiment of democracy, says Oscar Toe. If you call him Jimmy Dhaliwal in public, does that consider dead naming, says Urban Planner? Good question. I'll just explain that for many years in Canada, Jagmeet Singh went by the moniker Jimmy Dhaliwal, and then I suppose he decided that that wasn't Sikh enough, so he decided to rename himself as Jagmeet Singh. Of course, all Sikhs must have Singh in their name, but no, he just, wanted to let people know, oh, well, you got that long beard, which has never been shorn, and you got the turban, and you got the 5 other Ks, including a dagger you carry on yourself at all times. Curious, no? But no one suspected that you were a Sikh. Tom Anderson says, do the Canadian people even know that they're being replaced faster than any other? For the most part, they don't. Although a lot of people have noticed. A lot of people have noticed. And a lot of people have fled places like Vancouver, as I did, for 2 reasons. One, no one there seems to speak English anymore, certainly not in stores. And it has become impossible for anyone but the very poor or the very rich to live in Vancouver. And that's because of immigration. It was either Iveson or Ibbotson who was talking about the Great Migration. Oh, it's not the Great Replacement, it's the Great Migration. The effects are exactly the same, but one is a conspiracy theory and the other is a glorious future. And who else do we have here? Zen Master Football Analysis says these fact-checked articles are hilarious. They twist themselves into a pretzel, avoiding the obvious truth, and use feigned ignorance and wordplay to reach the wrong conclusion. And McKelly's said, what? How could the newspaper of record have lied? Dr. Deadname says, actually, it would be martial law if no civil courts were in operation, but state of emergency can be the functional equivalent of it. Again, the courts, some regional court is going to overrule the government of Canada in this emergency, which has been declared by the cabinet, and which is going to be almost certainly within 7 days approved by both the Parliament and the House of Commons and the Senate. No, I don't think so. And the Supreme Court of Canada does not rule against the government unless the government has thrown in the towel. The government, we don't want to make a political decision that would be unpopular, so we're going to toss it to the Supreme Court, and we are going to do a piss-poor effort of justifying a law so that you can toss it out, and so the government can say, hey, the Supreme Court has spoken, so, just shut up. Just shut up, okay? Was there did a majority of Canadians, were they in favor of legalizing prostitution? Well, we didn't get to have a debate on that. How about legalizing physician-assisted murder? No, we didn't get to have a debate about that, just like we don't get to have a debate about immigration. Zen Master says you can no longer call it paranoia. They are in your face with their criminal activities now, bold as brass about it. Being based in Red Pill, the KMG chat were born for periods in time just like this. Indeed, indeed. Frothing Fanboy, hello, says. Oh, yes, the FLQ murderers. There was a British diplomat, I believe his name was Eric Cross, who was kidnapped. He was released unharmed. And there was a Quebec cabinet minister called Pierre Laporte, who was murdered. Curiously enough, this affair just highlighted the incompetence of the Sûreté de Québec, or the Quebec Provincial Police. They were in the house where Laporte was being held at least 2 times, but somehow didn't manage to find him. Okay. Oh, I should point out, that Tommy Douglas, who was the leader of the NDP party at the time of the October crisis, was the only Canadian political leader who stood up against this monstrous suppression of civil rights. But of course, his successor doesn't believe in that sort of thing. So, what happened to Paul Rose? Did he go to Cuba? Let's see. His brother, I don't see Cuba in this story here. Okay. And yeah, his brother was part of this too. But no, 2 people killed. The province of Quebec and the whole country was put under martial law. And they are wondering why people are dropping out of society in record amounts, says Oscar Toe. Seraphim Goose says, I just got to stay optimistic. Yes. Yes, well, as Antonio Gramsci famously said, although this has been attributed to others, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Dr. Deadname says, we cannot get out. They have taken the bouncy castle and the second Tim Hortons. Honks from the deep. They are coming. Okay, let's go to this story here. Oh, no, Tucker Carlson has been saying things about Canada, and Americans are not allowed to say things about Canada unless it's, say, Barack Obama, saying, well, you got to reelect Justin Trudeau, right? I mean, come on. Yeah. This is hilarious. Canadians are always instructing Americans on what they should do. Oh, that horrible Donald Trump, etc., right? But no, Tucker Carlson has taken a interest in Canada. And there's a story from Gino Spacchia at the London Independent. Tucker Carlson ridiculed for calling Justin Trudeau a dictator. Well, he was lampooned by social media users after he accused Trudeau of being a Stalinist dictator who suspended democracy amid anti-COVID mandate demonstrations. The Fox News anchor, who was nicknamed Trucker Carlson by Twitter users, is that supposed to be a diss? Addressed viewers with a tirade against Canada's Justin Trudeau, whom he claimed had imposed martial law. It's not an overstatement to compare what is happening in Canada right now to what happens to the Stalinist in the Stalinist dictatorship, Carlson told Fox News viewers. The Prime Minister of Canada refused to meet with them or speak with them. Instead, he fled the city, and then from his bunker, he called out the truckers Nazis. Okay, so how is this wrong? We have someone saying that Tucker Carlson is funny. Carlson, who has been a vocal opponent of COVID mandates and restrictions both at home and abroad, continued by telling viewers, so let's be clear, this is a defining moment in the history of Canada, in the history of the English-speaking West. What's happening now does not qualify. What's happening in Canada now is not an emergency. Okay, yeah, so Tucker Carlson is wrong about this. How is he? Well, I'll explain once again. This is not martial law. Well, how is it not martial law? We just told you it's not martial law, and we don't want to have to tell you again. Tucker Carlson and Hannity are fueling the illegal convoys and interfering in Canada's internal politics. They should be barred from visiting Canada. If any Canadian on social media or anyone else, if they what they had to say about the United States, not just Trump's presidency, but George W. Bush or even George H.W. Bush or anything, I'm thinking we're looking at many, many millions of Canadians who would be banned from ever entering the United States of America. And yeah, what time? We're coming up to 5 o'clock PST. This is from the Canadian Press, CP24 Ottawa easing travel measures. And oh man, police describe high school shooting in Scarborough as execution. 14-year-old charged. I don't need to tell you what went on there, because you could probably guess if you know anything about what Toronto is becoming. If present trends continue, it won't be too long before Toronto becomes Canada's Detroit. But diversity is our strength. Remember? Do we have any figures from a CP24? Last time I discussed this, they don't really want to talk about who is becoming infected. No, but this today, Carissa Wilson of CP24 gives us the numbers. And, it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated, right? Right? Ontario confirmed 1,593 lab coronavirus cases today, but health officials say this is an underestimate due to testing restrictions. Among the latest cases, 59 are partially vaccinated, 276 have an unknown vaccination status, 260 are unvaccinated, and 998 are fully vaccinated. So far, 89% of Ontarians aged 5 years and older have received one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, 85% have received 2 doses, and 48% have received 3 doses. Why, just like Justin Trudeau, just like Prince Charles. They were thrice jabbed, and guess what? They got COVID anyway. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. As the Canadian Freedom Convoy rolls on and continues to influence other protesters around the globe, Canadian media continues to push outright disinformation by suggesting that the Russian government is behind the movement. When the convoy first came to prominence at the end of January, state broadcaster the CBC began spreading completely unfounded claims that Russian actors were present among the Canadian truckers. The tenuous reasoning behind the theory is that Canada has expressed support for Ukraine during the country's ongoing tensions with Russia. Rather than admit that working-class truckers are sick of enforced restrictions and vaccine mandates threatening their livelihoods, CBC floated the crackpot idea that Vladimir Putin is secretly behind the protests. CBC continues to push this conspiracy theory, with correspondent Harry Forrestal filing the following report Friday, giving airtime to New Brunswick's cybersecurity expert, David Shipley, who was adamant that the Russians are behind everything. Shipley proclaimed, who would have reason right now to cause as much chaos in Canada as possible? Well, at the top of that list is Russia. We are actively engaged in a geopolitical battle about the future of the Ukraine. You're supposed to call it just Ukraine now. Our foreign affairs minister, our prime minister, others have been very vocal in our support for the Ukraine. And it seems very likely that the tactics we are seeing, the creation of the massive Facebook groups using fake identities, or in the case now alleged by a U.S. media outlet, the stolen identity of Missouri woman to create these groups and to foster this communication, hundreds of thousands of people. This is the Russian Internet Research Agency playbook writ large. In any of these cases, I have to say, I just reflexively come to the conclusion that these fakes are the result of Antifa or people who are Antifa adjacent, or a Western intelligence agency. Key bono, as they say. There are still some people with courage in the world, and one of them is Novak Djokovic, world's leading tennis player. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Djokovic is sticking to his guns and refusing to take COVID vaccines, vowing to boycott both Wimbledon in London and the French Open in Paris if organizers say he must be vaxxed in order to take part. Following his incarceration and eventual deportation from Australia last month, Djokovic has spoken for the first time, asserting that, quote, "My body is more important than any title or anything else. That is the price I am willing to pay. I'm trying to be in tune with my body as much as I possibly can. For me, as an elite professional athlete, I've always carefully reviewed and assessed everything that comes in from the supplements, the food, the water that I drink, or sports drinks, anything really that comes into my body as a fuel. Based on all the information that I got, I decided not to take the vaccine, unquote. Well, that is genuinely inspiring, given that he is actually losing millions of dollars because of this. This is from Unheard. The French government rescinded the vaccine passports of up to 5 million of its people today, effectively banning them from much of French society. From the 15th of February, French citizens must have received a booster jab within 4 months of their second dose in order to access the vaccine pass, replacing the earlier deadline of 7 months. This means that unless they have recovered from COVID within the last 4 months, the passes of several million unboosted people will expire, leaving them completely excluded from bars, restaurants, cinemas, and other public venues. They will join the estimated 4 million unvaccinated French adults who have been banned from public venues since January the 24th. The French government's campaign against the unvaccinated has been one of the most draconian in Europe, with President Emmanuel Macron notoriously vowing on the 4th of January to emmerder, piss off. That's not what it means. It's much worse than that. Those who haven't taken the jab, by limiting as much as possible their access to social life. Is Macron, is he playing at revolution? Is that what he is doing? Is that what he is doing? And also from Unheard, a good piece by Jacob Siegel, who normally writes for Tablet magazine. The COVID regime has fooled us all. In the late stages of the American COVID regime, the science has become dramatically less important to the ruling class. Notably missing from a new debate about masking policy, in which President Biden has cast doubt on the recent decision by 7 Democratic governors to lift their states' mandates as probably premature, is any indication that either side had registered the mounting evidence that mask mandates have not worked. ICU doctor here. I skied 4 hours in an N95 and ski mask on top of it. Did not get hypoxic or hypercapnic. Anesthesiologist named Elad Sharifpour tweeted last month. The Centers for Disease Control advises that, quote, in general, people do not need to wear masks when outdoors, unquote. Well, thank you for that. But such is the enthusiasm for masking among some people, including medical professionals, that the doctor felt moved to boast about outdoing the CDC guideline while engaging in a solo sport that involves high-speed travel through wide open spaces. Yeah, I hope he threw away that N95 because they're good for 4 hours maximum. Last May, in a particularly striking example of the permanent pandemic mindset, 2 American doctors wrote an article arguing that masking should remain with us, becoming part of our everyday lives, even as the COVID-19 panic, science willing, subsides. Not God willing, but science willing. Because science is our new God, our false idol. Yet that emotional attachment to masks is even more pronounced today amid a backlash to the governor's move and proposals to lift remaining mask requirements in public schools. The New York Times COVID reporter David Leonhardt, a pro-vaccine, pro-masking moderate liberal, was denounced online by hundreds of people last week simply for pointing out that mask mandates involve trade-offs. Well, all public health decisions involve trade-offs, but no, we're not supposed to talk about that anymore. Do you want people to die? I made a joke today. Again, you may have heard me make this joke before, but some retired arts writer from the Toronto Sun was moaning about, oh no, we have to keep locked down forever because then old people are going to die of COVID, or people are going to die of COVID. Yes, and people die of all sorts of things all the time. And the older you are, of course, the more likely you are to die. I hope everyone understands that. But no, I responded to him that it seems that this fellow is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ, the vaccinated, radical adherents of which believe that those who have never had COVID-19 will never die. That's my homage to a famous joke by the great British satirist Peter Simple. Let's go to Steve Kirsch's Substack. Check out this paper published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, written by a bunch of CDC authors, including my favorite CDC misinformer, Dr. John Su. It's super popular, over 500,000 views. Myocarditis cases reported after mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccination in the US from December 2020 to August 2021. Oh, as a passive system, VAERS data are subject to reporting biases, in that both underreporting and overreporting are possible. Kirsch responds, I agree, underreporting is far more likely. In fact, the term overreporting wasn't even mentioned in the reference they cite. I can't even figure out how VAERS could be overreported, since the system should eliminate duplicates unless there is a bug. But the key thing here is they did absolutely nothing to attempt to quantify the underreporting factor. No, of course not. Kerry Watkins confirms embalmer Richard Hirschman's story about the telltale blood clots. And will hemorrhagic fever be the next pandemic? And from here, we go to see if there's anything new at Eugipius's Substack. He has a piece on, what do they used to call it, St. Vitus's dance? Choreomania. People in late medieval and early modern Europe were occasionally given to bouts of furious, contagious dancing. This happened most typically in the summer and autumn, often around the summer solstice or adjacent religious feasts. A few people would start, then more would join in, and before long, nobody could stop. The manic dancers often engaged in grotesque bodily contortions, sang crazy songs, and issued diabolical incantations. Some claimed it was primarily young women who fell victim to these crazes, but in principle, the mania afflicted all ages and genders. Often the dancers had to be physically restrained, lest they danced themselves to death. The mania could spread like a contagion, waxing and waning over the course of months. These periodic dancing epidemics have left an imprint in European folklore, for example, in the legends surrounding the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Since the 19th century, it's also attracted the interest of historians. In German, it's known as Tanzwut, or dancing craze. Another modern term is choreomania. Those are obligatory links to Wikipedia, and you should beware of them. As far as I can tell, most of our medieval and early modern forebears didn't recognize choreomania as a unified thing. Chroniclers don't say things like, in the year of our Lord, 1503, the choromaniacs came back. God, I hate these guys. Instead, they talk about specific episodes in isolation as unique and unremarkable events. I don't want to talk about the modern learned construct of choromania, but about specific choromanic episodes reported then. For this, what I hope to be the first of several posts on the subject, I'll introduce you to the dancing craze that struck the Low Countries and the Rhineland in the summer of 1374. Yes, so I guess he's making a point about mass hysteria, or formation, as we call it now, which again is another conspiracy theory. And again, that's at eugipius.com, EUGYPPIUS. There are some pieces, essays there behind a paywall, but most of it is not. Let's go to Alec Barrison's Substack, which is called Unreported Truths. He has a book called Pandemia, which I highly recommend. 23 hours ago, the mRNA COVID shots are killing teenagers. The Journal of the College of American Pathologists has a stunning report today on the cases of 2 teen boys who died following mRNA COVID vaccines. Both boys died in their sleep less than a week after the second dose, and neither had any known health conditions prior to the death. The report's lead author is Dr. James Gill, the Chief Medical Examiner for the state of Connecticut and the 2021 President of the National Association of Medical Examiners. Myocarditis requiring hospitalization is known to occur in up to 1 in 2,000 teenage boys and young men at rates following mRNA jabs, a rate far higher than the rate caused by COVID infection. In these cases, autopsies of the 2 teenagers found evidence of myocarditis, heart inflammation, that appeared very different than the standard presentation of myocarditis. The report suggested a hyperinflammatory cytokine response could have driven the damage. Dr. Rochelle Walensky, the director of the Centers for Disease Control, has repeatedly referred to post-vaccine myocarditis as mild and encouraged young men to be vaccinated. Got to eliminate that control group, Got to be eliminated, because people are going to be asking some pretty ugly questions in the months and years to come. Let's take a quick look at dailyskeptic.org. Hospital admissions fall 17% to lowest figure since before Christmas. This is Britain that we're talking about. And against the new normal, the battle for Britain's cultural identity. And why did Chris Wiki go from opposing face masks to mandating them with no new evidence they work? Because everyone else was doing it. The UK HSA data continues to show vaccine effectiveness highly negative against infection and dropping fast against death. Yes. These people have been playing the ratio game, and I've been warning them for weeks that the ratio game is going to end up looking very bad for you. Of course, vaccines still in phase 3 clinical trials are experimental. Fact-check website Lead Stories, which Facebook and others rely on to guide censorship, has published an article by journalist Ed Payne claiming to fact-check a recent Daily Skeptic article by retired pharmaceutical researcher Dr. John Flack. The fact-check is headlined, COVID vaccines are not experimental gene technology. They are fully authorized. Flack responds, I think Payne and I are just jousting around semantics, none of which addresses my fundamental concerns as to whether appropriate preclinical regulatory test protocols were conducted prior to MHRA, FDA, EMA approval of these novel gene-based vaccines. In his own admission, they're still under trial for about 3 years after being given the okay. Yeah. And we're close to leaving this accursed topic, but not before we have a look at William Briggs. His website, wmbriggs.com. He's the statistician to the stars. Canada becomes a dictatorship. Elsewhere, freedom seeps in. Weekly all-cause deaths for U.S. and England. How much credit, he asked rhetorically, will our side receive for being right about everything? The numbers are below the story. Last week, inspectors noticed certain instabilities and micro fissures in the massive regime narrative dam, which has been, up to now anyway, holding back reality. There was some patching since then, here and there, as in Canada turning into a dictatorship. Who saw the nicest people on earth opting for an actual, real-life, a bona fide, genuine, honest-to-God dictatorship? The Conservatives offered an act to consider a plan to someday, not today, end the unnecessary mandates. It was voted down because science. There will be no end to the crisis, not in Canada. The word is dictatorship, not used in some hyperbolic, ridiculous, emotional propagandist NPR sense. It is the technical name for the form of government when one man rules by fiat. The premiers of the Western provinces and Quebec, remembering the bad old days, said to Trudeau, please don't do this to us. Theresa Tam is for backing down and re-examining policies, repeating our line. It's clear now that Canada and the rest of the world will be grappling with COVID-19 for months or years to come. Years to come. Well, I guess that's what she wants. Oh, from Motherboard, anti-vaxxers are terrified the government will enforce, and enforce is in scare quotes, a vaccine for coronavirus. Which reminds me, the bosses at Conspiracy Theories Confirmed Monthly announced they are hiring extra staff to keep up with the demand. We heard from Bloomberg that, as we have told you since day one, mask mandates didn't make much of a difference. Anyway, the regime signals its acquiescence with lifting mask mandates, especially where celebrities gather. Not in British Columbia, however. No, not a bit of it. Jesse Kelly tweets thread, if you had something awful happen to you as a result of COVID restrictions, reply below. Going to read these on my radio show tonight. And the numbers in the countries which didn't vax as fast as, say, Britain did, or Israel especially, they are going to very quickly replicate, well, the results that we have seen, well, in Britain and in Israel and in Ireland, which is almost 100%, and the numbers are not good. They are not good in terms of infections, and they are increasingly not good with regard to deaths. Let's have a look at Jim Kunstler's column from yesterday, which is called Speed Wobble. If the ads on the Super Bowl each year are like a Rorschach test for the nation's mental condition, then this year's ad roll was a cavalcade of frantic hallucinations, suggesting a near complete detachment from reality for an audience of ADD disabled cell phone slaves locked into a big tech-induced consensus trance. You could barely tell what these advertisers were trying to sell in their commercials. The psychotic dazzle of half-second jump cuts was so ferocious. One interesting note, though, people of non-color seem to have been magically sucked out of the universe. There. That's fixed things for everybody else. Snoop Dogg's halftime house party, Hollywood's G-rated version of a BLM riot, heralded a real riot later on in downtown LA after the Rams' victory. Fans lit up a Metro bus and tagged it with spray paint. The police moved in, objects were thrown at them. I'm just sorry that Snoop didn't bring out his friend and sometime co-star Martha Stewart to twerk for the multitudes, while, say, whipping up a pumpkin mousse. That might have brought the country together after all these months of rancor. But like I said, sorry, PONCs need not apply. Nor did the dog invite on stage my favorite new pop star, Ski Mask the Slump God, composer of the hits Faucet Failure and Foot Fungus. Maybe next year, if there is a next year. Things are turning indeed out there, out in the truck stops and the households fending off repossession, and the small businesses struggling desperately for survival, even in the degenerate halls of government, state by state. The armature of COVID-19 tyranny is getting rapidly dismantled by politicians close to running for their very lives. The home folks have had enough of their insolence, and they're sharpening the teens on their pitchforks. Events also conspire to put the schnitz on the alleged globalist dream of digital tyranny, if there even is such a cabal of globalists, which I'm not sure about, or just a coterie of feckless hacks swept along by a malefic zeitgeist, Canada's Justin Trudeau being the poster boy for that breed. Joe Biden has so far failed to deliver that war with Russia over Ukraine he promised us, which would be like two Craigslist customers fighting over a 20-year-old Jeep Wrangler up on blocks with the engine missing. Ukraine President Zelensky is a professional comedian, of course, so one must admire his gag of inviting Joe Biden to visit his country, the gem of Eurasia, in the coming days, Zelensky said, which will be a powerful signal and contribute to de-escalation, plus all the pierogi and cabbage the U.S. president can eat. All this made National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan gnash his teeth for the trouble he has gone to in prepping the sore-beset American people for World War III. But Sullivan has perhaps other things to think about, like, what are all those offstage noises special counsel John Durham is making in the grand jury chambers? Something about Hillary Clinton and the helpmeets surrounding her in the 2016 election, including especially Jake Sullivan, alleged to have fabricated the Russian collusion whopper that deranged the nation for 4 years and disabled a sitting president. They even managed to enlist the FBI and the CIA in that task. How'd that happen? Could Hillary have been that peevish? Anyway, it looks kind of bad for the National Security Advisor to Joe Biden, having such an epic political fraud tacked onto his resume, with perhaps an indictment to follow, standing by on his resignation. Our NATO allies must be enjoying the rise of nat gas prices beyond the level that many middle-class households in Euroland can afford to keep the heat on in the dead middle of winter, since they have to get so much of the stuff from Russia. Maybe jamming Ukraine into NATO, as America's deep state has been wishing and hoping to do, wasn't such a great idea after all. Maybe NATO itself isn't such a great idea anymore. If World War III doesn't pan out for JB, there's always a global meltdown of financial markets, banks, and currencies waiting in the wings to amuse and distract everybody for the post-COVID call for a long, hard look at what the pandemic was actually about. The story in all its multiple gruesome levels has gotten away from them. So many public officials are standing naked that Washington looks like a nudist colony. Jim Kunstler concludes. Let's talk about the West's greatest ally. No, it's not Israel anymore. It's the Ukraine, which is a bought and paid for puppet of Western countries, of which my country, Canada, is one. Oh, we just have so much in common with the Ukraine and the ties throughout the years. I don't know how anyone can talk this way with a straight face, but they do. Arthur Schlesinger, who cannot be accused of being any kind of rightist, dean of liberal historians, Schlesinger cannot be accused of being a Hitler admirer. He made a famous statement about the Munich analogy. Always Munich. It's always 1938. And I was sick of this, 20, 30, 40 years ago, but it never ends. It just never ends. He wrote in an article in Encounter, the multitude of errors committed in the name of Munich may exceed the original error of 1938. Just so. Now, Neville Chamberlain famously said that Czechoslovakia was a faraway country of which we know little, and he is mocked for this. He was exactly right. And the Ukraine is a faraway country of which we know a little. But we're supposed to go to war for it, and I know that people are getting, I know that the foreign, how would you put it, the foreign relations community, they're getting absolutely furious at this. People don't seem to be very much up for a war with Russia over the Ukraine. And it's all Zero Hedge's fault. This is from Norman Merchant. I was reminded today that the Associated Press was like this with Hitler and the Nazis. They wanted access in the 1930s, so they promised, and they kept their promise, that there would be no bad tidings about Hitler's regime. Yes, the glorious Associated Press. Someone called No Man Merchant writes, U.S. intelligence officials Tuesday accused a conservative financial news website with a significant American readership of amplifying Kremlin propaganda, and alleged 5 media outlets targeting Ukrainians have taken direction from Russian spies. The official said Zero Hedge, which has 1.2 million Twitter followers, published articles created by Moscow-controlled media, which were then shared by outlets and people unaware of their nexus to Russian intelligence. The official did not say whether they thought Zero Hedge knew of any links to spy agencies. It did not allege direct links between the website and Russia. Zero Hedge denied the claims and said it tries to, quote, publish a wide spectrum of views that cover both sides of a given story, unquote. In a response posted online Tuesday morning, the website said it, quote, has never worked, collaborated, or cooperated with Russia, nor are there any links to spy agencies, unquote. The officials briefed the Associated Press on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive intelligence sources. Oh, you mean like that anonymity regarding the Steele dossier and Russiagate and Putin stealing the 2016 presidential election with a few $1,000s of Facebook ads? These are similar claims from anonymous members of the intelligence community. Again, they seem to be really annoyed that why doesn't everyone want to go to war with Russia? Oh, they have nuclear weapons, and we'll be thousands of miles away from home. Yeah, but it'd just be a cakewalk. Oh, where did I hear that cakewalk thing before? Something about Iraq. Brendan O'Neill at Spike writes, it is not appeasement to oppose war with Russia. Western liberals and neocons need to grow up. Putin is not Hitler, and Ukraine is not Poland in 1939. Normally, cosplay is just a little tragic. Adults dressing as anime characters or manga school kids or superheroes is embarrassing for them, but not particularly harmful. The same cannot be said for the political cosplay currently being engaged in by politicians and commentators across the West who have convinced themselves that Russia is the new Nazi Germany and that its imminent invasion of Ukraine will be akin to Hitler's Poland campaign of 1939. Yes, These people who have unconvincingly dolled themselves up as Second World War-style defenders of European liberty against a bleak, dark, authoritarian menace are an embarrassment. There's absolutely no question about that. But they're dangerous too. They are harmful, and many people could end up paying a high price indeed for their delusional narcissism. The Churchillian cosplayers are everywhere. You can't open a newspaper or browse the internet these days without stumbling across some virtue-hungry politician or iPad imperialist who is puffing himself up as a brave defender of the free world against an imminent replay of 1939. Every time I see that word imminent in relation to Russia's alleged plot to invade Ukraine, three other words come to mind. 45 minutes. I can't think why. And this is a reference to Tony Blair's lies about Saddam Hussein. The headline splashed across the front page of yesterday's Sunday Times declared, "This has the whiff of Munich." It was a report on words uttered by the UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace in which he compared Western nations' recent diplomatic efforts to prevent Russian aggression in Ukraine to the Munich Agreement of 1938, in which Neville Chamberlain, alongside France and Italy, struck a deal with the Nazis. In short, appeasement. Stop and think about the lunacy of this. Brendan O'Neill continues. Wallace is implying that President Macron and presumably his very own colleague Liz Truss, who recently visited Russia in what will surely go down as one of the most amateurish, bungled diplomatic sojourns of modern times, are not dissimilar to Chamberlain. Did you hear about the joke that was pulled by the high Russian official on Liz Truss, the foreign minister? He mentioned two parts of Russia and said, "Are you denying that this is Russian territory?" And Liz Truss, "Yes, we are denying that it's Russian territory." And then there was much hilarity from the Russian side and many red faces on the British side because he named two parts of Russia which no one disputes are part of Russia. This is how little Liz Truss knows about the region. But she wore a fur hat, despite the fact that there was no need for her to wear a fur hat. This is a piece from our favorite Mary Harrington at on Heard, and Applebaum swaps foreign policy for fan fiction. Anglo-American diplomacy in Ukraine continued its path towards full-blown surrealism with a contribution from one of America's most long-standing apostles of providential liberalism, Anne Applebaum. Responding to the recent press conference conducted by UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, Applebaum penned an impassioned diatribe in The Atlantic, or the Jobs' Widows blog, condemning Truss's utter failure to make use of that press conference. Applebaum's concern wasn't even with Truss's embarrassing inability to distinguish Russian from Ukrainian territories. It was with her failure to recognize what an irredeemable baddie Russia is and to wave a big enough stick to get the baddie back into his box. The Atlantic columnist has long been critical of Russia's self-dealing oligarchies and authoritarianism. This blind cartoon villain, Applebaum now suggests, has been allowed to rampage long enough. In a remarkable passage, she wrote what reads like, as the Atlantic Council's Emma Ashford pointed out, a Liz Truss fan fiction on how British diplomacy should really go. In Applebaum's fanfic, Truss announces that Britain has had enough of Russia, ignoring international rules and values. So along with taking punitive action by cutting off Russian gas supplies, they'll be sending troops to defend Ukraine for a decade, if need be. Oh, another forever war. And should that not make the Putin of Applebaum's imagination sit up, a threat to bring about regime change in Russia will see Britain get to work on regime change in Russia. Really? Few would dispute Putin's strongman style of leadership, and there's no shortage of detailed investigative writing on the Russian revolving door between business, politics, and violence. But one might ask, what of it? Perhaps Applebaum is just, in a narrow sense, very conservative. After all, it's not so long since everyone was forecasting a world of international interdependence where global trade would eliminate all international conflict and somehow bring about a single global happy family of democratic consumer capitalists. No wonder those who reveled in that vision are acutely offended by states who stubbornly refuse to comply with divinely ordained progress. As it turned out, we didn't get the happy universal democracy, but we did get the consumer capitalism, and now we have interconnectedness in spades, a world built on flows of information, money, and resources across borders. And that can be a vulnerability too, as Edward Luttwak has pointed out. Even withdrawing ambassadors and warning of imminent invasion has hit the Ukrainian economy with no offsetting aid has hitherto been forthcoming from the West. Leaving aside the militia women of German media propaganda, real cuties they were, who can say how that will be received among ordinary Ukrainians? Global trade was meant to be a vector for spreading Western values. It turns out it can be wielded by others to curb their reach. And there are two possible responses to that discovery. The first is to adjust one's high ideals to the actual balance of power, which is what Western diplomats are in practice mostly doing. The second is to write fanfic casting of all people Liz Truss as an Aragorn-like savior of Western democratic idealism, no matter what the price. Fortunately for all of us, such heroic flights of fancy are, at least for now, a luxury, mostly indulged by those commentators who still haven't noticed that the end of history is over. Remember the end of history? We're all going to be nice little liberal Democrats. Let's talk about Chrystia Freeland, who is widely believed to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. And that could happen quite quickly, actually. Trudeau could go at any time. Can't be good for him. Freeland was born in 1968. I've already mentioned her ridiculous little girl voice and strange body movements. I haven't mentioned her choice of disastrously short skirts in public places and showing enormous haunches. She's fond of wearing dresses that are far too small for her figure. And when you see her walking in videos, you'll notice this hilarious spectacle where the dress is desperately trying to flee from her body. She was a journalist and a manager, managing director of Reuters. Let's put it this way. If Chrystia Freeland glowed in the dark any brighter, she would be visible from space. So she graduates from Harvard with a BA, and she acted as a spy, you could say, against the Soviet Union. Then she got a master's degree in Slavonic studies from Oxford. Oh, geez, a Rhodes Scholar. There you go. You don't really need more than that, but there's a lot more with Chrystia Freeland. So she was one of these stars that was enticed into the Liberal Party, and she was made foreign minister. I really worry that if Chrystia Freeland does become Prime Minister of Canada, her first act will be declaring war on Russia. She is banned from that country. So I'm going to read from Wikipedia. Freeland's mother, Halnia Chomiak, was born at a hospital administered by the U.S. Army. Well, why would that be? This was in southern Germany. Because her husband was a U.S. intelligence asset. Her parents were staying at the displaced persons camp at the spa resort in Bavaria. Freeland's maternal grandfather, Mikhail Chomiak, Mikhailo, had been a journalist before World War II during the war in Nazi-occupied Poland and later in Nazi-occupied Austria. He was the chief editor of the Ukrainian anti-Semitic daily newspaper News of Krakow for the Nazi regime. See, he kept moving because when the Nazis kept retreating to the West, they took him with them because he was such an important asset. After Chomiak's death in 1984, John Paul Himka, professor of history at the University of Alberta, who was Chomiak's son-in-law and also Freeland's uncle by marriage, used Chomiak's records, including old issues of the newspaper, as the basis of several scholarly papers focused on the coverage of Soviet mass murders of Ukrainian civilians. These papers also examined the use of these massacres as propaganda against Jews. In 2017, when Russia-affiliated websites further publicized Chomiak's connection to Nazism, Freeland and her spokespeople responded by claiming that this was a Russian disinformation campaign. During her appointment to the position of Minister of Foreign Affairs, her office later denied Chomiak ever collaborated with Nazi Germany. However, Freeland had known of her grandfather's Nazi ties since at least 1996, when she helped edit a scholarly article by Himka for the Journal of Ukrainian Studies. She speaks Ukrainian at home with her children. She and her sister co-own an apartment in Kiev, and her mother is the co-author of the Ukrainian Constitution. Doesn't all this seem a little odd? A piece from David Puglisi in the Ottawa Citizen from March 8, 2017. Chrystia Freeland's granddad was indeed a Nazi collaborator. So much for Russian disinformation. There have been a number of articles circulating about Freeland's Ukrainian grandfather, Michael Chomiak, and his ties to the Nazis. Some of those articles have appeared on pro-Russian websites. Freeland, who strongly supports Ukraine, is a major critic of Russia's seizure of the Crimea, suggested to journalists that the articles about her grandfather were part of a Russian disinformation campaign. Oh, here's a direct quote. American officials have publicly said, and even Angela Merkel has publicly said, that there were efforts on the Russian side to destabilize Western democracies, and I think it shouldn't come as a surprise if these same efforts were used against Canada, unquote. In other words, she lied. The Globe and Mail also reported that an official in Freeland's office denied the minister's grandfather was a Nazi collaborator. In addition, the claims were dismissed outright by those in the Canadian-Ukrainian community. It is the continued Russia's modus operandi that they have, Paul Grod, president of the Canadian-Ukrainian Congress, told the Globe and Mail. Fake news, disinformation, and targeting different individuals. It is just so outlandish when you hear some of these allegations, whether they're directed at Minister Freeland or others, unquote. Well, it actually isn't so outlandish. Michael Chomiak was a Nazi collaborator. What are the sources for the information that Freeland's grandfather worked for the Nazis? For starters, the Ukrainian archival records held by the province of Alberta. It has a whole file on Chomiak, including his own details about his days editing the newspaper, Days of Krakow. Yes, and Chrystia Freeland knew all of this and lied about it. So should we take anything seriously she has to say on the topic of disinformation? Chrystia Freeland is apparently just like this with George Soros. Now, when I criticized George Soros this morning on Twitter, once again, I was accused of being a white supremacist and an anti-Semite, because the fact that George Soros is a Jew means that to condemn this one man as evil, which he is, means that one hates all Jews, which is only a crazy person would think that. But there are a lot of crazy people out there. This is a story from August 31st, 2020 by Andrew Chapados at Rebel News. Conservative MP Carrie Lynn Findlay tweeted out a video, Deputy Prime Minister and new Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland interviewing George Soros, stating the following: "She is listening carefully like student to teacher. The closeness of these two should alarm every Canadian." Predictably, this set off alarm bells through Liberal caucuses. Quebec MP Anthony Housefather said she was, quote, retweeting anti-Semitic tropes, unquote. Charles Adler of Global News said, quote, "This tweet that was harvested from a hate site, hardly a fulsome, unambiguous apology for composing and disseminating anti-Semitism," unquote. These people like Housefather and Adler should shut the hell up. They are not helping their own people in engaging in this kind of behavior. Quite the opposite. Nevertheless, Findlay cowered to the bullies and apologized. This wasn't the only time Freeland interviewed Soros gawkily. In 2015, her interview was called "The Future of Europe." If Soros isn't influential, why would his opinion on this be notable? Obviously it is. That's why the following year, the Canadian government looked to George Soros and his Open Society Foundation to pencil the refugee resettlement program. Freeland has a long history with Soros. And according to the Toronto Star, they are close friends and have been for some time. And Chrystia Freeland, was going to be George Soros's authorized biographer. How about that? This is from Vigile, Quebec. A Toronto newspaper has revealed that Canada's leading Russia hater, Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland, had a deal with George Soros to write his biography after she lost her journalist jobs at the Financial Times and Reuters, and before she started her run for election to the Canadian Parliament. On August 16th, the Globe and Mail reported Soros is a close friend of Freeland and that with her, he has very great hopes for Canada. Before she decided to run for Parliament, the newspaper says Freeland had a deal for a sort of authorized biography of George Soros. Soros' spokesman in New York, Laura Silber, refused to answer repeated questions last week for clarification of the terms of this deal or the compensation Soros agreed with Freeland. Freeland's first filing to the Canadian Parliament's ethics watchdog was registered May 1st, 2014. There's no mention of Soros, but there is income received under a book collaboration agreement with an individual. Freeland refused last week to identify that individual by name. But of course. And, oh yes, things not looking good for Hillary Clinton and her cabal. Steve Watson at Summit News. A poll has revealed that a stunning 66% of Democrats want to see a new investigation into Hillary Clinton's role in spying on the Trump 2016 campaign and the baseless charges of Russian collusion that followed his victory in the election. The issue has come back into the spotlight following revelations of the Durham probe into the FBI's investigation, which found that Clinton operatives paid a tech company to infiltrate servers at Trump Towers and the White House, not only to spy on the Trump team and dig up dirt, but also allegedly with the intention to manufacture a narrative of Russian collusion. Spying on White House servers. Treason, perhaps? This is from Rowan Scarborough at the Washington Times. As if it wasn't enough that Hillary Clinton campaign funded and distributed a fictitious Kremlin-sourced dossier meant to erase former President Donald Trump, we now learn her operatives were surveilling and collecting the former president's email traffic at his New York home, business, and the White House. And there is even a deeper subplot that has to do with misleading U.S. intelligence. But at this early stage in the Clinton campaign spying scandal, we still don't know the answer. What they did know and when did they know it? Michael Sussman is the Clinton lawyer who curated the massive domain name system internet spreadsheets and brought them to the press and FBI while billing the campaign. He oversaw an operation to prove that Trump had a secret cyber connection to Alpha Bank, the Russian oligarch-owned commercial lender. Candidate Clinton and current Biden National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan tweeted Sussman's finding as proof. But Sussman, Mrs. Clinton and Sullivan were chasing a ghost. The FBI concluded in February 2017 there was no such channel. The same month, post-campaign, Sussman doggedly pursued the ghost by meeting with the CIA. Yes, not looking good. Could we see an indictment against Hillary Clinton? That would be pretty thrilling. Because the Democrats and their allies in the media have made it clear that they intend to dog Donald Trump to his grave with every charge, real or fictitious, they can throw against him. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. And Joe Scarborough and his dimwit wife on Morning Joe were asked about this Durham bombshell. Nothing burger. Nothing makes no sense. Nothing burger makes no sense. Oh, it doesn't. Makes no sense. It makes perfect sense. And inflation apparently going to get worse. This is from Jeff Cox at CNBC. Wholesale prices rise 1% in January, up near record 9.7% over the past year. The producer price index, which measures wholesale prices, rose 1% in January, 9.7% for the 12-month period, the latter just off the record high. Core PPI rose 0.9%. Both increases were at least double the Wall Street estimates. Manufacturing in the New York region increased modestly in February, but was below expectations. You remember when all the experts told us that U.S. inflation, again, was going to be a nothing burger in 2022, 2%, 2.2%, something like that? It's a hilarious story by Lord Ashcroft in the Daily Mail. And, of course, he has just written a book about Carrie Johnson, Boris's third wife. And we don't know, the third, fourth, fifth woman to give birth to one of Boris's sprogs. Apparently, we're not meant to know how many children Boris Johnson has. The essence of this story is that Carrie Simons, as she was, had set her cap at Boris Johnson, going back 10 years ago. And she managed to get hired by Conservative Party HQ, where she distinguished herself by not showing up to work, doing pretty much bugger all when she was at work, taking an enormous amount of business trips and vacations all over the world, and cheating the Conservative Party by using taxi cabs for private use. And worse, putting taxi cab usage down to other employees, lower level employees. But I guess she was kind of forced to marry the boss, and of course she got pregnant, and this put Boris Johnson in a terrible position. If he hadn't married her, stayed with her, despite the furious arguments which they have on a regular basis, including about their dog, police were called. What was it? A couple of years ago, and Boris Johnson's reputation as what they call in Britain a love rat was so bad that he stuck with this woman. At least he stuck with this woman for as long as he remains prime minister. And I can't say that I have any sympathy for him. I don't want to seem like a bleeding heart or anything like that, but his behavior towards women throughout the whole of his life is nothing short of abominable. I think that's a good word. Steve Saylor has a very funny piece based on a piece in the New York Times. This dye consultancy is so flush with cash, it's taking Black History Month off to drink champagne in the bathtub. Is that a thing? From the New York Times business news section, when working for racial justice means taking Black History Month off. This is a story by Emma Goldberg. Rhonda Broussard spent 2 decades performing with West African dance groups in her free time. She would wait around all year for gigs until February when her calendar was jammed. In Black History Month, you get all the calls, she said. Now, Broussard runs a diversity, equity, and inclusion organization. No, it's properly diversity, inclusion, and equity, i.e. DIE, in New Orleans called Beloved Community. Starting last month, she has insisted her staff take February as a paid month off. As Beloved has been inundated with work, Broussard has been focused on giving her own team to rest. I wonder about this. I don't know that most people would, unless they're flying to tropical climes, they would prefer to have time off during the summer. Does this, if they get the month of February off, which is 4 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks plus a day, does that mean that they don't have any other vacation days during the rest of the year? Like so many DIE organizations whose activities might include teaching workshops, writing corporate communications, and rethinking hiring strategies, Beloved received an outpouring of client requests in the summer of 2020 after the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the wave of Black Lives Matter protests, mostly peaceful, as we know, that followed it nationwide. So, we don't do crisis management, Broussard says. We don't become the face of equity for your organization. What do you do then? Her team's breaking point came when a grocery store group in New Orleans facing charges of racial discrimination called on Beloved for its services. Her response was literally, keep Beloved's name out of your mouth. I am, as they say, not making this up. The last 2 years have seen a rapid expansion of the DIE field, which U.S. businesses were spending $8 billion on in the early 2000s when the last calculation was done. Hiring for most DIE-related roles grew more in 2020 than it had in the previous 5 years combined, according to the labor analysis firm MC Burning Glass. MC Burning Glass? Glassdoor, a career site, saw a 54% increase in DIE job postings from levels before the pandemic. Oh, McKinsey. McKinsey is involved in this. This month, Broussard is taking midday Brazilian dance classes and cooking gumbo. Carlo Macalo, The research coordinator is flying to Cancun with her mom. Nicole Caridad Ralston, the head of education and programming, is waking each morning and asking herself, what does she need from the day? Sometimes the answer is to paint or pay taxes. Other times she climbs into the bathtub to drink a champagne. Broussard knows that when she and her team step back to their laptops in March, Ooh, should they really have put that in the story? The work will be waiting. Our country took 400 years to get here, Broussard said. We're not going to fix things in the next 4 weeks. Like so many in the diversity and inclusion sector, Broussard has dedicated her life to fighting for equity. Oh, yes, and she got involved in this in the shooting of 18-year-old Michael Brown, the so-called gentle giant, who just about, beat a cop to death. And this guy was just, thug. But no, he's a hero. He's a hero. 4 weeks of February baths, daiquiris, and afternoon dance parties is a jarring proposition for a team of people acutely aware of their work's urgency. No, their work is not urgent in the slightest. Beloved's rest coach, Jackie O'Sullivan, or Jackie O, as everyone calls her, introduced herself to the group with a photo collage of her sources of joy: Earth, Wind, and Fire, Stevie Wonder, seafood, and sweets. Well, Earth, Wind, and Fire and Stevie Wonder, at least the Stevie Wonder up to about 1973 or 74, they're both really good. She showed off pictures of her 3 sons, noting that when she visited them at college, people mistook her for their sister. Of course they did. She wore an ankle-length tie-dye dress, maroon Converse, and colorful, thick-rimmed glasses, and carried under her arm the book Chakra Healing. You have permission to do what? Jackie O called out of the room. Rest, Beloved's team shouted back. To do what? Rest. To rest, Jackie O repeated with an appreciative nod, not to strategize and plan. In February, we could have done the whole, how do we put on a bunch of programs? But sometimes celebration is labor. Sabbatical allows us to center ourselves in a world that tells us that our worth is our labor. Okay, now, this is actually a trend now, okay? You know that, well, women are exhausted, right? They're just exhausted, completely exhausted, right? Because they have to work 5 or 10 times harder than everyone else. Now, Black women have to work, I don't know, 10 or 20 times harder than anyone else. I mean, we know these things, right? But then I came across a woman who is from Cameroon. And she's just so exhausted. You see, apparently, America doesn't have enough nutcase Black lesbian feminists. They have to be imported from abroad. Black women are exhausted beyond measure. We deserve to rest, according to this woman, the professor from Cameroon, who was called Siggy something or other. What more do we know about Siggy? Siri Allang of Allentown, Pennsylvania. She had a piece on Good Morning America in 2020. Why this parent says teachers should stop saying your mom and dad to kids. It's just so very hurtful. Allang, who is a single mother and gay, said the comment, ask your mom and dad, bothered her. My daughter was also in a foster home for several years and has a sibling in a group home, so there's no parent present at all, she told Good Morning America. All these things were going on in my head. So she has 2 children. One of them was in a foster home for several years, and one of them is currently in a group home. Was it really wise of her to bring this up? She also recalled her own childhood. Allang was raised by a single mother, and while she never articulated it before, teachers referring to dads and having students make Father's Day cards hurt her. So very, very easily hurt, especially if you're an alphabet person, feminist. from the Cameroon. This piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer is just, it is almost unbelievable because it is a form of demands, like a manifesto. We demand, we demand, we demand. Essentially, we demand the right to not have to work and to get paid for it. Now, some of you may be old enough to remember the welfare rights organizations of the 1960s and 1970s. Now, people on welfare were not getting all that much money, but people like Siri Alang, they are paid substantial amounts of money, but why should they have to work for it? You know, sloth is, it's a resistance, right? It's revolution, revolutionary sloth, which is quite a neat trick. Wouldn't you say? Certainly would. And you know, when this sort of thing gets taken up by major media sources like the Philadelphia Inquirer, the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, or whatever, you're going to see a lot of it. You're going to see a lot more of it. And this is a good thing, actually. Why is it a good thing? Because there's only so far that this sort of thing can be pushed before people become, well, sick of it, you know? How was your grief today? Her 7-year-old asked. Are you still struggling? And she responds in this piece that yes, she is always grieving and she is always struggling. But the solution is don't get work, don't work, and get paid a lot of money for it. The surplus in America is gone. It vanished in 2008. But America, and my own country, Canada, has decided to borrow money, to borrow stupendous amounts of money in order to keep this ever burgeoning parasite class stocked with iPhones and vacations in Cancun and all of the things that are necessary for the bougie life. This, when all of this falls in on itself, when the entropy occurs, it is going to be spectacular. And in a similar story, this is from Stephen Wynne Davis at the Daily Mail. The UK's top paid public sector diversity chief is a Network Rail employee who earns up to £165,000 a year and previously shared an article accusing Boris Johnson of white privilege. Lorraine Martins, the railway company's director of diversity and inclusion, is responsible for ensuring the network is more open, diverse, and inclusive. In 2018, she used her Twitter account to share a comment piece from The Guardian, which accused Boris Johnson, then Foreign Secretary, of white privilege. According to the Women at Work Online Summit, Ms. Martin's role includes overseeing a center of expertise which supports Network's Rail's ambition to be a more open, diverse, and inclusive business. Railway porters, if they still have them, they've been black in England since the 1950s. I don't know how much scope there is for increased diversity in England. How much money would be saved by sacking all these people at a stroke? Every single one of them? I mean, it's entirely parasitic. They contribute absolutely nothing. In fact, they harm companies and they waste enormous amounts of money. This is from Mark Dewell from the Daily Mail. Black HR manager loses race discrimination case after her boss asked her how she kept the chimp at bay in meeting about chimp paradox mind management theory. Lindani Sibanda was offended when asked about her inner chimp, tribunal told. But the question by Clinis Supply's boss Paul Cook was a reference to chimp paradox. This tool differentiates between irrational emotional thoughts and rational ones. Ms. Sibanda claimed to be unaware of it, but tribunal in Watford rejected case. This is just a fascinating employment history here. The hearing was told Miss Sabanda earns £37,000 a year working as an HR manager for Clinic Supplies, which manufactures and markets healthcare products. The tribunal was told that in the build-up to a conference in March 2018, a briefing session was held where attendees were asked to prepare their own examples for keeping the chimp at bay. Employees were asked to think of your experiences of chimp moments, how you reacted, and what the impact was. Ms. Sabanda attended the workshop as a member of a group which were bringing cultural change to the organization. That's never good. That is never good. Although she was offended by the use of the phrase at the time, Ms. Sabanda told the tribunal she appreciated that the phrase was used in a well-known and established mind management tool. But she claimed the phrase was never used during the workshop and was used by Mr. Cook without context. However, the tribunal heard that she never complained about the use of the phrase and rejected her claim to be unaware of it. The hearing was also told that in May 2018, a junior employee raised a grievance against Sabanda for her, quote, oppressive management style. This led to a clash with HR director Amanda Cass. Oh boy, you want to stay out of those HR versus HR fights, whom she accused of speaking to her in a derogatory, condescending, and dismissive way. After Sabanda handed in her own grievance, claiming that she was being racially discriminated against, bosses at the firm concluded she wanted to leave the company and invited her to a meeting to discuss her future. But she went on sick leave due to stress for 2 months, and in June 2018 sent her employment tribunal claim form to her bosses, which they interpreted as her resignation. Sabanda claimed at the tribunal that she had been sacked and made claims for unfair dismissal, race discrimination, and harassment and victimization. Dismissing her claims, the tribunal, headed by employment judge Sarah George, concluded, we reject Sabanda's evidence that she was unaware of the chimp theory at the time, and we reject her evidence that it was not discussed in the workshop she attended. So, you get into a fight with someone at work, and then you take 2 months sick leave, and she was paid for this, and then you produce a document which everyone would believe was your resignation, and finally Sabanda will receive £250 for unauthorized deduction from wages due to unpaid long service award. Is this woman still working for this company? Could that be possible? This is the, I guess this is the payment that England must pay for its legacy of slavery, to have every company over, 10 or 15 employees, absolutely, public or private, absolutely destroyed by DIE. And I was supposed to talk about Peru, but today, because of events in the last couple of days, I ran long, and I'm not going to extend this beyond any longer, except one final story. Joshua Q. Nelson at Fox News. Thai model attacked on New York City subway by suspect with 44 prior arrests. Something is fundamentally wrong. Career criminal charged 3 months after assault robbery. She said she saw the worst side of the Big Apple after this. After leaving a concert in November, model Boo Jira Jariwech was on her way home when she was attacked by suspect Kevin Douglas, who was on the video striking her and holding her to the ground. Brutal mugging, purse snatching. Douglas was charged with second-degree robbery, third-degree robbery, and second-degree assault, the New York Police Department said, according to the New York Post. Douglas was arrested for another alleged assault on the same day. He was already in jail when he was charged with the assault Thursday and is due back in court April 1st. Douglas's extensive record dates back to 1997 and includes 44 arrests, 16 on one day in May 2019 alone for unknown reasons. The Post reported his arrests include assault, drugs, criminal tampering, and illegal possession of a weapon. Now, Fox News doesn't want to get into this, and I can see why, which is this career criminal. Douglas is a black man. So here we have yet another case of an Asian, typically it's women, sometimes it's men, being brutalized by American blacks, but whose fault is it? Apparently, it's Donald Trump's fault for some reason that remains obscure. Let's have a final look at the chat. Kevin Douglas is Scott, says Ogan's Iron. Hello. Who else do we have? They also have identity labor, says Ogan's Iron. Yes, there's emotional labor, too. Your labor is your worth. Well, if you're not, if you don't have rich parents, yeah, your labor is your worth. That's how it works. Hello to Birkin Sultanoff. Where can I get a job like that? Says Yo Mama. I don't know. I mean, just from what I read, working in HR, it just sounds like a nightmarish job because of the insane complaints that you get, typically from women, but from some men. And your need to, I don't know, express yourself through your job in just being ridiculous. Anyway, as I've mentioned before, and as Tinkszorg has pointed out, that these woke companies, these woke initiatives, they always break down in extreme rancor. The reason being that the people who work for these woke companies are angry lunatics. She wasn't going to do the emotional labor and explain the exhaustion, says David the Gnome. Ellen Reddy was a Kanakastani after all, says Birkin Sultanoff. I am woman, hear me bore from the same source. PJ O'Rourke died today, says Frothing Fanboy. I remember speaking quite some time to PJ O'Rourke. He just come out with a book called Republican Party Reptile. I guess, was that in the 80s or in the 90s? Anyway, it was a long time ago. I thought he was very funny, but then something happened to him. When Jack Welch at GE fired, I don't know, 100,000, 200,000 people, something like that, O'Rourke just chortled with glee. These useless people, these middle managers, good riddance. And I thought, I don't like this man anymore. And nothing that I saw after him I found sympathetic in the slightest. There's a lot of class envy in the man, that just the shame, as he saw it, of attending the University of Miami in Ohio, right? Instead of, I don't know, perhaps even the University of Miami in Florida would be a more prestigious institution. But no, I came to thoroughly dislike him. It's really selfish of parents to talk about their emotional and psychological problems to their children, says British Correcting. Too true. We have to work. We have to have leisure on which happiness depends, says Aristotle, quoted by True Greenberg. Yeah, I wonder which class of people he's talking about, though. I've noticed that, especially these days, it seems like the enormous majority has a great deal of difficulty with leisure. Is it leisure when you don't have to work, say, but you have your smartphone in your hand all day long, and you are constantly checking things or sending messages? Is that leisure? That's not how I see leisure. That's not how I see it at all. And Cameroon worked only when the Kaiserreich ran it, says Emmett Kelly's Earth. They were not good colonists there. They were second in the brutality stakes, only to the Belgians. Who do we have? Anyone else here? I think that's about it. BLM is so effeminate, says Yo Mama. Well, what? 2 out of the 3 founders are lesbians, and both of them are involved with trans people, I believe. I think I'm right about that. KMG, how's the apartment hunting going? Well, we're going to the final hours here. I'm getting a little worried about it, but okay. So tomorrow is Wednesday. Yes, Wednesday. And so I will talk about Para-Uba then, because I had kind of a backlog of Canada dictatorship stuff to get through. On Thursday, Theater Thursday, I'm going to be discussing a movie from 1960 set in the Midlands in England about labor unions. It's called The Angry Silence, directed by Guy Green. I watched it again for I suppose it would have been 55 years since I'd seen it the first time, and I was very impressed. I've been very impressed the first time I saw it. I was even more impressed the second time. And on the book club on Friday, I'm going to be discussing Paul Gottfried's latest opus, which is called Anti-Fascism. So thank you all for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.